My husband's family disowned me, but I became the woman their sons could never forget. Those words aren't just a story title, child. They're the truth of my life, etched into my bones like scars that never quite fade. I remember the day they looked at me and decided I wasn't worth keeping. I remember the coldness in their eyes, the way they turned their backs as if I were nothing more than a shadow passing through their gilded lives. They thought disowning me would erase me from their world. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that some women don't disappear when you cast them out. Some women become unforgettable. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, let me say this. I'm Grandma Alice, and this is Grandma Alice Stories, a place where I share the lessons life carved into my heart. If you're here, it means you understand that some stories need to be told, that wisdom comes from walking through fire and choosing to speak about the burns. Subscribe to this channel, won't you? Help me reach 1,000 subscribers before next week. Every story I tell is a piece of truth that might help someone else find their strength. Now settle in close. This one goes deep. I was 23 years old when I married Thomas. He was the youngest son of the Montgomery family, a name that carried weight in our town, dripping with old money and older pride. The Montgomerys owned half the businesses on Main Street, and their estate sat on the hill like a crown overlooking the rest of us common folk below. Thomas was kind, gentle in ways his family wasn't. He had soft eyes and a laugh that made you feel like the sun had broken through the clouds. When he chose me, a girl from the South Side with calloused hands and a second-hand wedding dress, his family took it as a personal insult. I'll never forget walking into their house for the first time as Thomas's wife. The mansion smelled of old wood and expensive perfume, and every surface gleamed like it had never known a day of honest work. His mother, Eleanor, stood in the foyer with her arms crossed, looking me up and down like I was a stain on her marble floor. She didn't smile. She didn't offer her hand. She simply said, "So you're the one." Not "welcome to the family." Not "we're glad to have you." Just, "So you're the one." Thomas's father, Richard, barely acknowledged me at all. He grunted something about dinner being at 6 sharp and disappeared into his study. But it was Thomas's brothers, Charles and William, who made my skin crawl. They were older, polished, and cruel in that casual way privileged men often are. Charles smirked when Thomas introduced me, his eyes lingering on my simple dress and worn shoes. William just laughed. A short, dismissive sound that said everything without words. "Well, brother," he said, clapping Thomas on the shoulder. "You certainly have unique taste." I felt my face burn, but I held my head high. I'd learned early in life that dignity isn't something people can take from you unless you hand it over. So I smiled politely, thanked them for having us, and followed Thomas to the dining room where a table long enough to seat 20 people held only 6 place settings, as if they were reminding me how much empty space I didn't fill. That first dinner was excruciating. Eleanor asked pointed questions designed to highlight everything I lacked: my education, my family's finances, my unfamiliarity with their social circles. "And where did you attend university, Alice?" she asked, knowing full well I'd never set foot on a campus. When I explained I'd worked since I was 16 to help support my mother and siblings, she made a small humming sound and changed the subject as if my answer was too distasteful to acknowledge further. Charles and William spent the meal making inside jokes I wasn't part of, referencing people and places I'd never heard of, laughing at memories that deliberately excluded me. Thomas tried to bring me into the conversation, but every attempt was met with cool indifference or outright dismissal. By the time dessert arrived, I felt like a ghost sitting at that table, present but unseen, there but unwanted. After dinner, as Thomas and I prepared to leave, Eleanor pulled him aside. I wasn't supposed to hear, but her voice carried through the hallway like a blade. "I don't know what you were thinking, Thomas. That girl is so far beneath us it's embarrassing. She'll drag our name through the mud. Mark my words, this marriage is a mistake you'll regret." I stood frozen by the door, my coat half on, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart with icy fingers. Thomas's voice was firm when he responded. "She's my wife, Mother. I love her. That should be enough." But Eleanor's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Love? Darling, love doesn't pay bills or maintain legacies. That girl will be nothing but a burden on this family." A burden. That word followed me home that night, echoing in my mind as Thomas drove in silence, his jaw tight with anger and hurt. When we reached our small apartment, nothing compared to the Montgomery estate, he held me close and promised me it would get better. "They'll come around," he whispered into my hair. "Once they see how strong you are, how good you are, they'll love you like I do." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But months turned into years, and nothing changed. We'd visit for holidays, and I'd spend entire afternoons in their kitchen preparing meals, while Eleanor criticized every dish. "Too much salt, Alice. That's not how we make it in this family. Perhaps you should write these recipes down. You seem to struggle with memory." I'd smile through gritted teeth, adjust the seasoning, and serve dinner to a table full of people who ate my food without a single word of thanks. Charles and William treated me like invisible help. They'd call me to refill their drinks, ask me to clear their plates, speak over me when I tried to join conversations. When I became pregnant with our first child, Eleanor's response was a thin-lipped, "Well, I suppose that was inevitable." Not congratulations, not joy, just resignation, as if I'd done something inconvenient. Thomas defended me when he could, but I watched the light in his eyes dim a little more with each family gathering. He loved his family, despite everything, and their rejection of me wounded him deeply. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped when his mother turned away from me, in the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore when we left their house. I gave birth to our son, James, in the spring. Thomas wept when he held him, and I thought, prayed, that surely a grandchild would soften their hearts. But when we brought James to meet the Montgomerys, Eleanor held him for exactly 30 seconds before handing him back to me. "He looks like your side," she said flatly, as if that were a disappointment. Richard didn't even hold him. Charles and William glanced at the baby and returned to their conversation about business acquisitions. I stood in their grand living room, holding my precious son, and something inside me cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked. A hairline fracture in the foundation of my hope that these people would ever see me as family. 3 years later, Thomas got sick. It started as fatigue, then weight loss, then doctor's visits that turned into hospital stays. Cancer, they said. Aggressive. We'd need help. Financial help, emotional help, any help we could get. I called Eleanor, my voice shaking. "Please," I said. "Thomas needs his family right now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, in a voice colder than winter frost, she said, "We've discussed this as a family, Alice. We believe it's best if we distance ourselves from this situation. You've been a strain on Thomas from the beginning, and frankly, we can't afford to be dragged down by your circumstances." My breath caught in my throat. "What are you saying?" "We're saying," Eleanor continued, each word precise and cutting, "that this family no longer considers you or Thomas part of it. We're disowning you both. Don't contact us again." The line went dead. I stood there in our tiny kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone while my husband lay in a hospital bed fighting for his life. They'd abandoned us, cut us loose like we were diseased. And in that moment, something else happened to that crack in my foundation. It didn't break. It hardened, turned into steel. That night, as I sat beside Thomas's hospital bed watching him sleep, his face pale and thin, I made myself a promise. I would survive this. I would raise our son. I would build a life so strong, so undeniable, that one day, the Montgomery family would look back and realize exactly what they'd thrown away. But what I didn't know then, sitting in that sterile hospital room with my hand wrapped around my husband's, was that their sons would be the ones to come looking for me. They say the darkest hour comes just before dawn. But child, let me tell you, when you're living through that darkness, when you're watching the man you love fade away while the world turns its back on you, dawn feels like a cruel myth someone invented to give false hope. I didn't know if morning would ever come for me. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, keep breathing, keep fighting. Not just for myself, but for my son who was watching me to learn what strength looked like. Welcome back to Grandma Alice Stories, where I share the truths that life carved into my soul. If you're returning for Chapter 2, thank you for walking this journey with me. And if you're new here, subscribe and join our family. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you matters. Your support gives these stories wings. Now, let me tell you what happened after the Montgomerys slammed the door in my face. Thomas died on a Tuesday morning in October. The leaves outside the hospital window were burning orange and gold, as if the world was celebrating while my heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces. He squeezed my hand one last time, looked at me with those gentle eyes that had first made me believe in love, and whispered, "You're stronger than all of them, Alice. Don't you ever forget that." Then he was gone. I sat there for what felt like hours, holding his hand as it grew cold, unable to process that the one person who'd chosen me, truly chosen me, was no longer breathing. James was only 3 years old, too young to understand why Daddy wasn't coming home, too young to carry the weight of grief I was drowning in, but not too young to need me, not too young to deserve a mother who could hold herself together. I called the Montgomerys one more time, not because I expected anything, God knows I'd learned better, but because Thomas deserved to have his family know he'd passed. Eleanor answered on the third ring. I could hear conversation and laughter in the background, the clinking of glasses. They were having a party. "Eleanor," I said, my voice hollow. "Thomas passed away this morning." Silence. Then, "I see. Well, thank you for informing us. We'll send flowers to whatever funeral home you choose." Her tone was the same as if I'd told her the grocery store was having a sale. Flat. Disconnected. Empty. "That's it?" I asked, something breaking inside me. "Your son is dead. And that's all you have to say? Alice." Her voice sharpened like a knife. "We made our position clear. Thomas made his choice when he married you, and these are the consequences. We wish you well, but we have nothing further to discuss. Goodbye." The line went dead. Again. I stood in that hospital hallway, phone in hand, and something fundamental shifted inside me. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But beneath it, something harder crystallized. Rage. Pure, clarifying rage. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly, but the cold, enduring kind that fuels you for years. They'd rejected me when I needed help. They'd abandoned their son when he was dying. And now they'd dismissed his death like it was an inconvenience. I would never forgive them. But more than that, I would never give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Thomas's funeral was small. My mother came, my sisters, a few friends from our neighborhood. The Montgomery family sent an elaborate flower arrangement with a card that read, "With sympathy." Not even their names. Just a printed card from some expensive florist. I stared at those flowers during the service, white lilies and roses that probably cost more than my rent, and thought about how empty they were, how perfectly they represented people who'd rather send money than show up with their hearts. After the funeral, reality hit like a freight train. Medical bills, funeral costs, rent, groceries, James's needs. I had exactly $247 in our bank account and a mountain of debt that grew taller every time I opened the mail. I'd been working part-time as a seamstress from home while caring for Thomas. But now I needed more. Much more. I took a job at a diner on the South Side, working the early morning shift from 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. The tips weren't great, but they were steady. After my shift, I'd pick up James from my mother's house, spend the afternoon with him, put him to bed, then stay up until midnight doing alterations and mending for clients I'd built up over the years. I sewed wedding dresses, hemmed pants, fixed torn coats, whatever people needed. My fingers bled sometimes from pushing the needle through thick fabric. My eyes burned from squinting in dim light, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Some nights, I'd collapse into bed at 1 a.m. and have to be up again at 4 a.m. to start it all over. There were mornings I'd stand in the shower crying from exhaustion, letting the water hide my tears so James wouldn't see. But every morning, I'd dry my face, put on my uniform, and go to work. Because that's what mothers do. That's what survivors do. James grew. God, how he grew. He was bright, curious, full of questions about everything. Mama, why is the sky blue? Mama, where did Daddy go? Mama, why don't we have a big house like the ones on the hill? I'd answer as best I could, trying to give him truth without burdening him with bitterness. I never spoke ill of the Montgomerys to him, though the words burned in my throat sometimes. He had a right to know his father's family existed, even if they'd chosen not to know him. Years passed. 3 years. 5 years. 10 years. I kept working, kept saving, kept building. I took business classes at the community college at night, learning about accounting and management. I expanded my sewing work, eventually renting a small shop on Main Street, 6 blocks down from the Montgomery businesses. But I was on their street nonetheless. I called it Alice's Alterations. And slowly, steadily, it grew. People started coming to me not just for simple repairs but for custom work. Brides wanted their dresses made by hand. Businessmen wanted tailored suits. I hired 2 seamstresses to help with the workload. Then 4. Then 6. My little shop became known for quality, for care, for treating every customer like they mattered, because I knew what it felt like to be treated like you didn't. James grew into a remarkable young man. Smart, kind, hard-working, everything his father had been. He got good grades, won scholarships, asked me questions about integrity and character that made my heart swell with pride. I raised him to understand that money doesn't make you better than anyone else, that respect is earned through how you treat people, especially those who can do nothing for you. He never met his father's family, never even asked about them, really. To him, family was me, my mother, his aunts and cousins. The Montgomerys were just names I'd mentioned in passing, ghosts of people who'd never wanted to know him. But I heard about them. Oh, you couldn't live in our town without hearing about the Montgomerys. Charles had 2 sons, Robert and Daniel. William had 3, Michael, Christopher, and young Thomas, named after the uncle he'd never met. I'd see them sometimes, these boys, being driven through town in expensive cars, dressed in private school uniforms. I'd watch them and wonder if they knew their Uncle Thomas had existed, if anyone had told them about the aunt and cousin they had living just down the street. Then, when James was 16, something unexpected happened. I was closing up the shop one evening, locking the front door, when a young man approached me. He was about 19 or 20, tall, well-dressed, with dark hair and eyes that looked hauntingly familiar. He stopped a few feet away, looking nervous. "Excuse me," he said. Are you Alice Montgomery? I mean, Alice who was married to Thomas Montgomery?" My heart stopped. I knew those eyes. They were Charles's eyes, Thomas's eyes, Montgomery eyes. "I am," I said carefully. "Who's asking?" He took a deep breath. "My name is Robert Montgomery. Charles is my father. And I think you're my aunt." The world tilted slightly. This was Charles's son, the son of the man who'd smirked at me, dismissed me, watched his brother die without lifting a finger, standing on my doorstep, calling me his aunt. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Robert looked down at his expensive shoes, then back up at me. "I want to know the truth," he said quietly, "about my Uncle Thomas, about why our family never talks about him, about you." I stood there in the fading evening light, This boy man in front of me carrying questions I'd stopped expecting anyone from that family to ask. Behind him, the street lamps were starting to flicker on, casting long shadows across the pavement. I should have sent him away. Should have told him to go back to his gilded cage and forget I existed. That's what they'd done to me after all. Forgotten me like I was nothing. But as I looked at Robert's face, I saw something I hadn't expected to see in a Montgomery. I saw Thomas. Not just in his features, but in his eyes. That same gentle searching, that same quiet courage it took to stand against his family's expectations and seek out the truth they tried to bury. "Come inside," I heard myself say, unlocking the door I just locked. "If you want the truth, Robert, then I'll give it to you. Every painful word of it." What I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly know, was that this conversation would set off a chain reaction that would shake the Montgomery family to its very foundation. Sometimes the truth you bury doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it grows roots, and those roots crack even the strongest foundations from below. There are moments in life when you stand at a crossroads you never expected to reach. Moments when the past you've carefully folded away suddenly unfolds itself right in front of you, demanding to be seen. That evening, as I unlocked my shop door and let Charles's son step inside, I didn't know I was opening more than just a door. I was opening a chapter one thought I'd closed forever. And child, once some stories start telling themselves, there's no stopping them until they reach their end. Welcome back to Grandma Alice Stories. I'm so grateful you're here for Chapter 3, walking this journey with me through the painful places and the healing ones too. If these stories touch your heart, please subscribe. We're this close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world. Share this with someone who needs to hear that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up every single time. Now, let me tell you what happened when the past came knocking. I led Robert through my shop, past the sewing machines and fabric rolls, to the small office in the back where I kept my books and took my coffee breaks. It wasn't fancy, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a small window that looked out onto the alley. But it was mine. Everything in that shop was mine, built with bleeding fingers and sleepless nights and a determination that had kept me breathing when I wanted to stop. Robert sat down carefully, like he was afraid he might break something. I poured us both coffee from the pot I kept warm, handed him a cup, and settled into my chair. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. This boy who carried my dead husband's blood and the woman his family had erased from their history. "How did you find me?" I asked finally. Robert wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "I was going through some old boxes in my grandmother's attic. She doesn't know. I was looking for something else, and I found these." He pulled a small stack of photographs from his jacket pocket and laid them on my desk. My breath caught. There was Thomas, young and smiling, his arm around me on our wedding day. Another of us at a park, him pushing me on a swing, both of us laughing. A third of him holding baby James in the hospital, his face radiating pure joy. I hadn't seen these pictures in 16 years. I thought they'd been destroyed. "She kept them?" I whispered, touching Thomas's face in the photograph. "Eleanor kept them. Hidden," Robert said, "in a locked box in the back of a closet, buried under other things. But she kept them. And on the back of this one," he turned over the wedding photo. In faded ink, someone had written, "Thomas and Alice, June 1985. The day he chose love over everything." Tears burned my eyes. Who wrote that? I don't know. But when I found these pictures, I started asking questions. My father shut me down immediately, told me to put them back, forget I'd seen them, that it was family business that didn't concern me. But my grandfather, Robert paused. My grandfather Richard pulled me aside later. He looked old, tired. He said, "Your Uncle Thomas was a good man who made his own choices. If you want to know about him, don't ask us. Ask the woman who loved him." Then he gave me your address. Richard, the man who'd barely spoken to me during the years I'd known him, who'd grunted at me across dinner tables and looked through me like I was invisible. He'd kept my address. He'd sent his grandson to me. "What do you want to know?" I asked Robert. "Everything," he said simply. "I want to know who my Uncle Thomas was. I want to know why our family acts like he never existed. I want to know—" His voice cracked slightly. "I want to know if he was as good as I think he was, or if that's just wishful thinking about an uncle I never got to meet." So I told him. I told him everything. I told him about Thomas's kindness, his gentleness, how he'd loved fiercely and loyally even when it cost him everything. I told him about our courtship, how Thomas had taken me to diners instead of fancy restaurants because he wanted to know the real me, not some polished version I might perform in expensive places. I told him about our wedding, small and simple, with more love than money. And then I told him the hard parts, the rejection, the coldness, the way his grandmother had looked at me like I was contaminating her pristine world, the way his father and uncle had mocked me, dismissed me, treated me like hired help in a house where I was supposed to be family. I told him about Thomas's illness, about how I'd called begging for help, about Eleanor's voice on the phone cutting me off from the family like I was a diseased limb that needed amputation. Robert's face went pale. "They abandoned you? When he was dying? They disowned us both," I said quietly. "Told me never to contact them again. Your Uncle Thomas died without seeing his family one last time because they decided we weren't worth the inconvenience." "But the flowers," Robert started. "A card and an arrangement," I interrupted. "No names, no presents, no mourning, just money, which has always been easier for your family to give than actual pieces of themselves." Robert set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "I don't understand. My father talks about family honor, about the Montgomery name, about legacy and responsibility. How could they just—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Because I wasn't good enough," I said simply. "In their eyes, I was beneath them. And your Uncle Thomas choosing me over their approval was an insult they couldn't forgive. So they erased us, rewrote the story so we never existed." "But you did exist," Robert said fiercely. "You do exist. And so does—" He stopped. "I have a cousin, don't I? Thomas had a son. James," I said, pulling out my wallet and showing him a recent picture. "He's 16 now. Smart, kind, working hard in school. He wants to be an engineer. He's never met any of you, never asked to. To him, the Montgomerys are just a name." Robert stared at the photograph like it was a treasure map. "Can I meet him?" I should have said no. Should have protected James from the family that had rejected him before he was even born. But something in Robert's face stopped me. That same earnest openness Thomas had possessed. That same willingness to reach across divides that should have been unbridgeable. "Why?" I asked. "Why do you want to meet him? Why do you care about any of this?" Robert looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "Because I've spent my whole life feeling like something was missing. My father and uncle, they're successful, powerful, respected, but they're cold. They don't laugh. They don't talk about feelings or dreams or anything real. Every dinner is a business meeting. Every conversation is about money or status or connections. And my grandmother—" He shook his head. "She's the worst. Nothing is ever good enough. Everyone is beneath us. She's turned love into a transaction and family into a corporation." "And your grandfather?" I asked, thinking of Richard's unexpected gesture. "He mostly stays silent," Robert said. "But sometimes I catch him looking sad, like he's mourning something he can't name. Now I think I know what it was. He lost a son, and instead of grieving, they all just pretended it never happened." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Robert spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be like them. I don't want to end up cold and closed off, measuring people's worth by their bank accounts. And when I found those pictures, when I saw how Thomas looked at you, how happy he seemed, I thought maybe if I could know him, know you, know the truth, maybe I could figure out how to be different." My heart cracked open. This boy, this young man, was asking me to help him become the person his father had failed to be. He was reaching for the light his family had extinguished, trying to reignite it in himself. James gets home from school at 3:30, I said finally. Come by the house tomorrow. I'll introduce you. But Robert, I fixed him with a steady gaze. If you do this, if you open this door, your family won't like it. They'll see it as betrayal. Robert met my eyes with a determination that reminded me achingly of Thomas. Good, he said. Maybe it's time someone in my family chose love over everything else. Maybe it's time we remembered what Uncle Thomas tried to teach us. That night, after Robert left, I stood in my empty shop and thought about the strange ways life circles back on itself. The family that had cast me out was sending their sons to find me. Not the fathers who'd rejected me, but the sons who were searching for something their fathers had lost. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about what tomorrow would bring, about James meeting Robert, about doors opening that I thought were sealed forever. What I didn't know, what I couldn't see coming, was that Robert wasn't the only Montgomery son who'd been searching. The truth has a way of spreading like wildfire once the first spark catches. And child, that fire was just beginning to burn. If you want to know what happened when the other Montgomery sons came knocking, when the family that disowned me couldn't ignore me anymore, subscribe to Grandma Alice Stories. These stories need to be told, and you need to be here for every chapter. Hit that subscribe button. Let's reach 1,000 together. Your grandmother Alice has more truth to share, and this story? We're just getting to the good part.